Nobody believed in humans anymore. Ambassador Rillian stretched her forearms and listened to the young cadets sharing scary stories in the recreation hall. She was Velith, an aquatic species known for their logical minds and complete rejection of superstition. These ghost stories about mythical creatures called humans amused her greatly. They say humans can run for days without stopping, whispered a Keshri cadet, her fur standing on end. They chase their prey until it collapses from exhaustion. I heard they domesticated wolves, added a trillion, his silicon body vibrating with nervous energy. Wolves, apex predators. They turned them into pets. Rillian laughed softly. Every spacefaring civilization had its boogeyman stories. Humans were the hegemony's version. Tales spoke of creatures from a death world called Earth, located somewhere in the blind reach where navigation was impossible. These legendary beings supposedly survived by hunting the most dangerous animals on their planet. They bonded with predators. They kept fighting with broken bones. They refused to die when they should. All nonsense, of course. Ambassador, the stories are real, said a young Keshri officer named Trill. Her large eyes were completely serious. My grandmother met one, a human survivor from a crashed ship decades ago. She said he was terrifying and gentle at the same time. Your grandmother had a wonderful imagination, Rillian replied kindly. No verified contact with humans has ever been recorded. They are myths, nothing more. Trill looked hurt, but said nothing. The hegemony of United Species had maintained peace for 3,000 cycles. 12 major species cooperated in harmony. War was a distant memory, something primitive civilizations did before they evolved past such barbarism. The idea of needing legendary warriors was almost funny. Then the alarms began. Emergency transmissions flooded every screen in the assembly hall. Rillian rushed to the main chamber where representatives from all species gathered in growing panic. The holographic displays showed something impossible. The Drath Collective had awakened 10,000 years ago. The Drath, a machine intelligence of unknown origin, had nearly wiped out all organic life in the galaxy. They were stopped only when they suddenly went dormant, retreating to the dark spaces between stars. Every species hoped they would sleep forever. The hope died today. 3 border systems have fallen, announced Fleet Commander Osric, his massive silicon form trembling. The Drath are advancing. They do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They simply consume. The assembly erupted in chaos. Species that had not built warships in centuries scrambled to organize defenses. Military strategists who had only studied ancient battles tried to form coherent plans. Fear spread like poison through the gathered representatives. Rillian watched the tactical displays with growing horror. The hegemony's combined fleets were mobilizing, but the numbers were devastating. Early projections suggested they were outnumbered 20-1. The Drath moved with perfect coordination, their geometric ships advancing in formations no organic mind could match. We need help, someone shouted. We need the humans. Bitter laughter answered. Humans are not real. We need actual solutions. Trill stepped forward. What if they are real? What if the stories are true? Earth isn't a blind reach. Maybe they have been hiding. Maybe they have been waiting. Waiting for what? Rillian asked. For someone to need them. It was desperate thinking. Childish hope in fairy tales. Rillian opened her mouth to say so when the communication systems crackled with interference that a transmission was coming through. From the blind reach, the signal was weak and garbled. The universal translator struggled with the unknown language. Technical specialists worked frantically to clean up the audio while the entire assembly watched in terrified silence. Finally, words emerged. A single phrase, repeated over and over in a voice that was strange and somehow warm. We heard your call. We are coming. The assembly fell completely silent. Rillian felt her heart's beating faster. She looked at Trill, who stood frozen with tears forming in her large eyes. Around them, representatives of 12 species stared at each other in shock. That cannot be real, someone whispered. Track the signal, Commander Osric ordered. Find the source. The technicians worked quickly. The results made no sense. The transmission originated from a region of space that was supposed to be empty. Navigation was impossible there. No ships could survive the journey. Unless the stories were true. Unless something lived in that impossible place. Unless the legends were real. They are coming, Trill breathed. The humans are coming. Rillian wanted to dismiss it as coincidence. Some other species, perhaps, using an unknown language. A misunderstanding. Anything but the impossible truth, but deep in her logical mind, something stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. The war had begun. The Drath were coming to exterminate all organic life. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient and terrifying and somehow wonderful was moving toward them. The legends were waking up. For the first time in 3,000 cycles, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what kind of monsters would come to save them. The Drath Armada looked like a wall of death. Commander Osric had fought simulations his entire career. He had studied ancient battles in military academies. Nothing prepared him for this. The enemy ships stretched across his sensors in perfect geometric formations, thousands upon thousands of vessels moving as one mind. His fleet had been fighting for 6 days. They had lost 40% of their ships. The surviving crews were exhausted, terrified, and running low on everything. 12 species had sent their best warriors, and it was not enough. Commander, the main Drath force is approaching, his tactical officer reported. It is 10 times larger than the force we've been fighting. Osric felt his silicon body grow cold. 10 times larger. His remaining ships could not survive another hour against the current enemy. Against a force 10 times this size, they would be dust within minutes. Prepare evacuation orders, he said quietly. Save who we can. Then his sensors screamed warnings. Something was emerging from slip space behind the Drath formation. Multiple contacts. The readings made no sense. The ships were small, shockingly small compared to hegemony vessels. Yet their power signatures rivaled capital ships. They numbered only 47. The vessels looked wrong. Asymmetrical, covered in what appeared to be old battle damage that had been repaired and damaged again. They broadcast no identification codes. They followed no formation patterns. The computer recognized one ship broke away from the others and accelerated directly toward the Drath line. It moved at speeds that should tear any vessel apart. It was heading straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. Suicide, Osric thought. Brave, but pointless, that a transmission cut through all frequencies. Every ship in both fleets heard it. Hegemony vessels. This is Captain Nadia Sorokin of the Terran vessel Stubborn. We apologize for our late arrival. Please hold position. We will handle this. The voice was calm, almost casual, as if facing 1,000 enemy ships was an ordinary afternoon. The Stubborn reached the Drath line and opened fire. Osric had never seen weapons like these. The human ship danced through enemy formations, spinning and twisting in ways that should be impossible. It took hits that would cripple hegemony vessels and kept fighting. When its weapons failed on one side, it simply rammed into the nearest enemy and used the collision to destroy both targets. The other human ships joined the battle. They fought like nothing Osric had ever witnessed. They flew into point-blank range where superior Drath numbers should destroy them instantly. They used their own ships as shields to protect damaged allies. When one vessel lost its engines, the crew kept firing until the ship was torn apart around them. A human cruiser took a direct hit to its reactor. Instead of exploding immediately, it accelerated into the Drath command vessel, destroying both in a blast that blinded sensors across the system. They are insane, Osric's tactical officer whispered. They are completely insane. No, not insane. Osric understood suddenly. They simply did not care if they died. They only cared about winning. About protecting the ships behind them, about making their deaths mean something. The Drath formation shattered. Machine intelligence could not process enemies who welcomed death. Their perfect coordination broke against human chaos. Ships that had never known fear faced something worse than fear. They faced creatures who had decided that dying well was better than living as cowards. When the battle ended, the Drath had fled. 23 human ships remained from the original 47. More than half their fleet, gone in a single engagement. Captain Sorokin's face appeared on view screens across the hegemony fleet. She was unlike any species Osric had seen. Soft skin covered in scars. Two eyes that faced forward like a predator. Hair the color of fire pulled back from a face that showed exhaustion and something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Sorry about the mess," she said, and her mouth curved upward in an expression Osric did not recognize. "We brought medical ships. Permission to assist your wounded?" Osric could not find words. Around him, his crew stared at their screens in shock. They had watched legends come to life. They had seen 47 small ships break an armada that should have destroyed them all. "Permission granted," Osric finally managed. "Captain Sorokin, what are you?" The human's expression changed again. Softer now, almost sad. "We are humans," she said simply. "We are what happens when a death world creates something that refuses to stay dead. Now, please, let us help your people. We have a lot of work to do, and this was only the beginning." The medical ships arrived. Human doctors and nurses boarded hegemony vessels, treating wounds with gentle hands and soft voices. These were the same species that had just fought like demons. The same creatures who rammed their ships into enemies without hesitation now carefully bandaged injuries and spoke soothing words. Osric watched them work and finally understood the old stories. Humans were not monsters. They were not angels either. They were both. And somehow, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Trill woke up screaming. Pain shot through her body as she tried to move. Her last memory was fire and metal and the terrible sound of her ship breaking apart. She should be dead. Every part of her body told her she should be dead. Instead, she was lying in a soft bed in a room that smelled like nothing she recognized. "Easy, easy," said a voice. "You are safe. Please do not move too quickly." Trill turned her head and saw her nightmare, that a human stood beside her bed. The creature was massive compared to her small Keshri frame. Its eyes faced forward like a hunter watching prey. Its hands looked strong enough to crush her skull without effort. She tried to scream again, but only managed a whimper. "I am Dr. Amara Okonkwo," the human said softly. "You are aboard the hospital ship Mercy's Hand. Your injuries were severe, but you will recover completely. May I check your bandages?" The human waited. It did not move closer. It simply stood there, patient and calm, asking permission. Trill remembered her grandmother's stories. Terrifying and gentle at the same time. "Yes," she whispered at Doctor. Okonkwo's hands were warm and careful. She explained everything she did before she did it. She asked questions about Trill's comfort. She treated a Keshri she had never met with more kindness than many of Trill's own species had shown her. "Why?" Trill finally asked. "Why did you come? Why risk your lives for strangers?" The doctor paused. Her strange, forward-facing eyes looked sad. "We have known about your hegemony for over 100 years," she said. "We watched from the darkness. We saw your peaceful civilization, and we were afraid. Afraid of us. Afraid of ourselves." Dr. Okonkwo sat down slowly, keeping her movements gentle. "Humans nearly destroyed ourselves many times. Wars. Weapons that could burn entire cities. We evolved as predators, as hunters, as killers. When we reached the stars and found peaceful species, we thought we would only bring destruction." Trill listened in amazement. The legendary humans, terrified of themselves. "We hid," the doctor continued. "We stayed in a blind reach and watched. We hoped you would never need us. When the Drath awakened, we debated for 3 years. 3 years of argument and fear and shame. What changed? Children." Dr. Okonkwo's voice became thick with emotion. "We saw images of Drath attacks. We saw children of your species running from machines that wanted to kill them. And we knew we could not hide anymore. Whatever we are, whatever terrible things humans have done, we could not watch children die and do nothing." On Station Meridian, Ambassador Rillian was having a similar conversation. She had expected to meet warriors. Instead, the human diplomatic envoy was a soft-spoken scholar named Professor David Whitfield. He was old by human standards, with white hair and lines on his face that she learned were signs of age. He walked slowly and spoke quietly and cried when she showed him images of draft destruction. "Forgive me," he said, wiping his eyes. "We historians feel things deeply. So much death, so much waste. You are not what I expected," Rillian admitted. "What did you expect? Monsters, legends, creatures of war." Professor Whitfield smiled sadly. "We are all of those things, but we are also teachers, artists, parents who love their children. Humans contain multitudes, Ambassador. The same hands that built weapons also painted beautiful art. The same minds that planned wars also wrote poetry. How do you live with such contradiction?" "Badly, most of the time." He laughed, a strange sound that Rillian was beginning to understand meant humor mixed with pain. "We spent our entire history fighting ourselves. Then we spent our spacefaring years trying to become something better. We failed often. We succeeded sometimes. When we learned organic life was being exterminated, we had to choose. Choose what? Whether to be what we were or what we wanted to be." He met her eyes directly. "We chose to be both. We would use our terrible gifts to protect those who could not protect themselves. We would fight like monsters so that others could live in peace." Back on the hospital ship, Trill asked Dr. Okonkwo about human biology. "You require less sleep than any known species," Trill said. "You can function while injured in ways that would kill us." "How is this possible?" "Earth is a death world," the doctor replied simply. "Everything that wants to kill you. Weather, animals, plants. Even the air is full of things that attack your body constantly. Humans evolved to survive the unsurvivable. We are not stronger than every creature on our planet. We simply refuse to die until we have finished what we started." A message arrived from the front lines. More draft forces were coming. The armada they had defeated was merely a scout group. The true fleet was approaching. Captain Sorokin's voice came through the speakers, addressing all human vessels. "This is what we trained for. This is why we came. Tell your families you love them. Make peace with your gods if you have them. Then report to your stations. We hold the line until the line breaks, or we do." Trill watched the humans around her. "No panique. No despair. Just quiet acceptance and preparation." "Are you not afraid?" she asked Dr. Okonkwo. "Terrified," the doctor admitted. "But fear does not excuse us from doing what is right. That is what being human means. We feel everything, and we keep going anyway." For the first time since the war began, Trill felt something that might have been hope. Earth tried to kill Ambassador Rillian the moment she arrived. The gravity pressed down on her like a giant hand. The air burned her gills with its oxygen content. Radiation from the yellow sun hammered against her protective suit. She looked out the window of her landing craft and saw a world of impossible violence. Predators hunted prey across vast plains. Plants grew thorns and poisons to defend themselves. Weather systems large enough to swallow cities moved across the surface. And everywhere, between every moment of destruction, life fought to survive. "This is insane," whispered a trillion delegate beside her. "Nothing should live here. Everything lives here," their human guide replied. "That is the point. Earth does not forgive weakness. Every species that survived did so by being tougher, smarter, or more stubborn than everything trying to kill it." The delegation included representatives from 8 species. All of them struggled with Earth's conditions. The Keshri wrapped themselves in cooling suits. The Velith required constant moisture. The Trillions moved slowly, their silicon bodies groaning under the gravity. Their destination was Geneva, where the United Terran Council would receive them formally. Along the way, Rillian saw things that haunted her. Children played games that involved running, jumping, and falling down repeatedly. They laughed when they got hurt. Their parents watched with mild concern, but did not stop them. "Why do you allow this?" Rillian asked. "They could injure themselves." "They will injure themselves," the guide agreed. "That is how they learn. Human children must understand pain early. Our world does not protect the careless." In a medical center, Rillian met elderly humans who had survived diseases, accidents, and injuries that should have killed them dozens of times. One old woman had replacement parts for half her organs. She smiled and offered Rillian tea. "Died twice," the old woman said cheerfully. "Heart stopped completely. They brought me back both times." Still have things to do, you know. Rillian did not know. Her species considered death a natural ending, not an enemy to be defeated repeatedly. The hegemony delegation visited a human history museum. What Rillian saw there nearly broke her. Wars that killed millions. Weapons designed to burn cities to ash. Genocides and atrocities committed by humans against other humans. The exhibits did not hide anything. Every terrible moment in human history was preserved and displayed. Why do you show this? Rillian demanded. Why preserve such horror? Professor Whitfield, who had accompanied them, answered quietly. Every human child learns this history. We remember, so we do not repeat. These crimes are our inheritance. We carry them always. Does it not make you ashamed? Deeply. And that shame drives us to be better. He touched a display showing an ancient war. The same species that did this also created art that makes people weep with joy. The same hands that built these weapons later built hospitals and schools. We are capable of the worst things in the universe. We are also capable of the best. How do you choose which to be? Every day, every moment, every choice. Professor Whitfield smiled sadly. Being human means constantly fighting yourself. The easy path leads to darkness. We must choose the harder path, over and over, forever. A trillion delegate asked why humans had not simply changed themselves. Genetic modification could remove aggression. Technology could suppress violent impulses. We tried, Professor Whitfield admitted. It did not work. Our aggression is not separate from our other qualities. Remove the fire, and you also remove the warmth. The same drive that makes us fight also makes us love fiercely, protect desperately, and sacrifice willingly. We learn to control the fire instead of destroying it. While the delegation toured Earth, the war continued in distant systems. Captain Sorokin led her remaining ships in defensive actions that cost lives every day. Human losses mounted, but something unexpected was happening. Other species began volunteering to serve on human vessels. Trill, fully recovered from her injuries, demanded a position on the Stubborn. You are Keshri, Captain Sorokin said. This is not your fight. Humans came to fight for us, Trill replied. I will fight for you. That is what friends do. Sorokin studied the small alien with her fierce eyes. Then she smiled, an expression Trill was learning to read as approval. Welcome aboard. Try not to die. The formal alliance between humanity and the hegemony was signed in Geneva. As celebrations began, an urgent transmission arrived from the front lines. The main Drath Armada had arrived. It filled the sensors of an entire system. Thousands of ships, more than anyone had imagined. Captain Sorokin's report was brief. We are outnumbered roughly 100 to 1. Recommend immediate reinforcement. Human High Command responded immediately. All Terran forces begin Operation Thermopylae. Hold the line. Reinforcements incoming. The transmission ended with words spoken in dozens of human languages. Rillian did not understand all of them, but she understood enough. Come home with your shield or on it. She watched the human delegates at the celebration. They received the news, shared quiet looks, and then continued smiling for their guests. Not one showed fear. Rillian finally understood what made humans truly terrifying. They were not afraid to die. They were afraid of failing the people who trusted them, and they would burn the galaxy to ashes before they let that happen. 47 humans and 1 Keshri against the end of everything. Trill sat at her sensor station aboard the Stubborn, the only non-human among the crew. She had trained for weeks. She had learned human battle songs, eaten human food, and listened to human stories about ancient wars and desperate victories. Now she faced the greatest battle in galactic history. The Drath Armada stretched across her screen like a cancer made of metal. Thousands of ships, millions of weapons, one unified machine mind with a single purpose: exterminate all organic life. Scared? Asked Lieutenant Pavel, the weapons officer beside her. Terrified, Trill admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He grinned, showing the teeth that still made Trill slightly uncomfortable. Channel it. Use it. That is the human way. Captain Sorokin's voice filled the ship. All hands, battle stations. Remember why we are here. Remember who we are protecting. And remember, the Drath do not know what fear is. We are about to teach them. The battle began badly. Drath numbers were overwhelming. For every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. Human tactics caused massive damage, but the cost was terrible. Ships died around Trill, their crews fighting until the last moment, their final words often messages of love to families they would never see again. But something unexpected was happening. The hegemony ships were fighting differently. Species that had never known war executed maneuvers they had learned from human instructors. A Velith cruiser protected a damaged human frigate with its own body. Trillion vessels formed defensive walls around hospital ships. Keshri fighters flew in patterns that mixed their natural agility with human aggression. They are learning, Trill reported. The hegemony forces are adapting. That is what we taught them, Captain Sorokin replied. Adaptation, stubbornness, the refusal to accept defeat. The Drath adapted too. They identified human command ships and concentrated fire. Casualties rose sharply. Human commanders began authorizing attacks that had no chance of survival, sending ships to die so others could live seconds longer. Professor Whitfield, the gentle historian, found himself commanding a rearguard action when the military officers on his ship were killed. He quoted ancient battles from human history, applying tactics from wars fought with swords and spears to combat with plasma weapons and missiles. Thermopylae, he muttered, organizing a desperate defense. Marathon, Stalingrad. Humans have always found ways to hold impossible positions. Dr. Okonkwo operated on wounded soldiers while her medical bay took direct hits. Her staff begged her to evacuate. She refused. Patients cannot be moved, she said calmly, continuing surgery while explosions shook the ship. We stay with them. The stubborn lost its engines. The ship drifted, powerless, still firing every weapon that functioned. Captain Sorokin called a crew vote on whether to abandon ship. The vote was unanimous. They would fight until there was nothing left to fight with. Trill voted with them. She was Keshri, but today she was human. Then, from the blind reach, sensors detected new contacts at T1st. Trill thought her equipment was malfunctioning. The readings showed thousands of vessels emerging from slip space. Not military ships, cargo transports, mining vessels, personal yachts with weapons welded to their hulls. Passenger liners converted into troop carriers. Every space-worthy human vessel had come, that a transmission reached the fleet, the voice old but strong. This is Rosa Medina of the Transport New Hope. Former cargo captain, current grandmother of 6, an extremely angry human. Brought some friends. Where do you need us? The civilian flotilla numbered in the millions. Retirees, students, parents who had kissed their children goodbye and flown into battle. People with no military training who had decided they would rather die fighting than live, knowing they abandoned their species. Trill felt tears streaming down her fur. Why? She whispered. Why would so many come to die? Lieutenant Pavel answered. Because humans do not abandon their own. And today, everyone fighting the Drath is our own. The battle shifted. Fresh ships poured into the fight. Civilian vessels followed military orders with surprising discipline. They could not match the Drath in firepower, but they had numbers. They had fury. They had the desperate courage of people defending everything they loved. The Drath Central Intelligence tried to calculate these new variables. It could not. Its programming understood efficiency, optimization, and logical outcomes. It did not understand creatures who flew unarmed ships into combat simply to provide cover for their friends. The machine mind made a decision it had never made before. Retreat. Captain Sorokin opened a channel to the fleeing Drath fleet. Her voice was cold and hard. No, you came to exterminate us. You threatened our friends. You do not get to run. The human fleet pursued. Trill watched the sensors as thousands of ships chased an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. Cargo ships and warships flew side by side. Species that had never fought before screamed battle cries in a dozen languages. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Drath knew something that felt almost like fear, and the legends were just getting started. The silence after war felt heavier than the fighting. 6 months had passed since the final battle. The Drath's central intelligence was destroyed, its vast machine mind shattered across a dozen systems. The remaining units shut down without coordination, drifting lifelessly through space. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was truly safe. The cost was beyond calculation. Station Meridian hosted the memorial ceremony. Representatives from every hegemony species attended, filling halls that had never seen such crowds. Human losses had been catastrophic. Nearly 40% of their fleet was gone. Millions of lives, from decorated admirals to grandmothers who had flown cargo ships into battle. Ambassador Rillian stood at the podium, struggling to find words. She had spent her entire career using careful language to navigate political situations. Now she faced an audience of grieving species and could not remember a single diplomatic phrase. "I prepared a speech," she finally said. It was full of appropriate sentiments and respectful acknowledgments. It was completely inadequate. The audience waited in silence. "We called humans legends. We were wrong." Rillian paused, collecting herself. They were not legends. They were people who chose to become legendary. Teachers who picked up weapons. Doctors who operated under fire. Grandparents who flew unarmed ships into battle because they could not watch others die. She looked at the human delegation. Captain Sorokin sat in a mobility chair, still recovering from injuries that would have killed any other species. Dr. Okonkwo stood beside her, holding the hand of a Keshri officer. Professor Whitfield wept openly, making no attempt to hide his tears. "Any of us could make that choice," Rillian continued. "They taught us that. They showed us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more than your fear, more than your safety, more than your life." The ceremony continued for hours. Names were read. Stories were told. Species that had never understood each other found common ground and shared grief and shared gratitude. Afterward, the galaxy began to change. Species that had not built weapons in centuries now trained defensive forces. Not because they wanted war, but because they finally understood that peace required protection. Human instructors traveled to dozens of worlds, teaching not just combat, but the philosophy behind it. "Fight to protect, not to destroy," they taught. "Violence is a tool, not a goal. Use it when necessary. Put it down when the job is done." Human culture spread across the hegemony. Music and art and stories found audiences on alien worlds. Human food became popular, with restaurants opening on stations throughout known space. Human words entered other languages, concepts that had no equivalent suddenly having names. Dr. Okonkwo opened a medical school on Station Meridian. Students from 30 species learned human techniques for treating impossible injuries. The first class graduated with a new oath, adapted from an ancient human tradition. First, do no harm. But when harm comes for those who cannot defend themselves, stand in its way. Professor Whitfield wrote a new history of the galaxy. His work included humanity's story, told honestly, with all its darkness and all its light. It became required reading on dozens of worlds. "History is not about the past," he wrote in the introduction. "It is about the choices we make today, informed by everything that came before." Humans are proof that any species can change, that any darkness can be overcome, that the worst sinners can become the greatest saints. Captain Sorokin eventually recovered enough to walk again. She returned to active duty, commanding a new ship, crewed by humans and hegemony volunteers alike. Trill served as her first officer, the first Keshri to hold such a position. One evening, Trill visited Sorokin in her quarters. "May I ask you something?" "Always. Why did you come?" Trill sat down slowly, still unused to speaking so directly with the woman she had once feared. "You could have stayed hidden. The Drath might never have found Earth." Sorokin considered the question for a long moment. "There's an old human saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." She smiled slightly. "We spent centuries asking ourselves what kind of people we wanted to be. When we heard your distress calls, we finally had our answer. But you lost so much. So many of your people died. That is what makes it meaningful. Sorokin reached out and took Trill's small hand in her own scarred fingers. Sacrifice without cost is not sacrifice. Every human who died chose to die protecting strangers they would never meet. That choice, freely made, is what separates legend from reality. She squeezed gently. We are not legends, Trill. We are humans. We simply refuse to be anything less than what our children will need us to be. The memorial ended. Ships from 100 worlds departed for home. On Earth, children were told stories of the great battle, of the aliens who became friends, of the humans who proved that the most terrifying predator in the galaxy could also be its most loyal protector. In time, these stories spread across the hegemony. Parents told them to children around countless different suns. They became part of galactic culture, repeated and adapted and treasured. They called humanity a legend. They were right. Not because humans were mythical, but because humans chose every single day to live up to the myth. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy that legends are not born. They are made, one choice at a time, by ordinary people who refuse to let evil win.